What if I told you that the war between heaven and hell wasn't just a metaphor? What if the cosmic battle that's been hidden from humanity for thousands of years wasn't between God and the devil, but between enlightened beings and parasitic rulers who feed on human suffering? The texts that reveal this truth were burned, buried, and branded as heresy by the very institutions that claim to protect your soul. Welcome back to Occult Chronicles, where we excavate the forbidden knowledge that powerful forces never wanted you to discover. Today, we're diving into the Gnostic scriptures, the Hammadi texts, and the apocryphal writings that describe a war so profound, so disturbing, that the early church fathers did everything in their power to erase it from human memory. This isn't your Sunday school version of angels versus demons. This is something far more ancient, far more complicated, and infinitely more terrifying. Because what if the beings you've been taught to worship aren't who you think they are? What if the Archons, those interdimensional parasites described in the forbidden texts, have been masquerading as angels of light this entire time? The Gnostics knew this. The early Christians knew this. The mystery schools of Egypt, Persia, and Mesopotamia all pointed to the same horrifying truth. Humanity is trapped in a prison, and the jailers wear halos. Let me ask you something before we go deeper, and I want you to think carefully about this. Really think about it. Why would the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD systematically remove dozens of books from the Bible? Why would the Catholic Church hunt down and execute anyone who possessed these texts? What were they so afraid you would learn? The official story is that these texts were heretical, that they contradicted the divine message. But when you actually read these forbidden scriptures, when you see what they say about the nature of reality, about who's really in control, you begin to understand why they had to be destroyed. The Apocryphon of John, the Pistis Sophia, the secret book of James. These weren't just alternative gospels. They were instruction manuals for spiritual warfare, guides to escaping the Archonic matrix that keeps humanity enslaved. And the Archons, they didn't like that. Not one bit. Let's start with the basics, because if you're new to this rabbit hole, buckle up. According to Gnostic cosmology, the God of the Old Testament, the one who demands blood sacrifice, the one who drowns the world in rage, the one who commands genocide against entire nations, that wasn't the true God. That was Yaldabaoth, also called the Demiurge, a malevolent entity born from the fall of Sophia, divine wisdom herself. Yaldabaoth is described as having the face of a lion and the body of a serpent, a being so arrogant that he proclaimed himself the only God, completely ignorant of the true divine realm that existed beyond his perception. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? This jealous God who says, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me," who punishes humans for seeking knowledge, who casts out anyone who questions his authority. The Gnostics looked at this being and said, "That's not God. That's a cosmic tyrant." And the Archons, they're his administrators, his enforcers, interdimensional parasites who feed on human fear, suffering, and ignorance. They're described in the Nag Hammadi texts as having grotesque forms, some with animal heads, others as formless shadows that attach themselves to human consciousness. Their job is simple: keep humanity trapped in the material world, keep us reincarnating, keep us forgetting who we really are. Because if we remember, if we awaken to our true divine nature, their power over us dissolves completely. Now, the angels, the true messengers of the ineffable divine source beyond Yaldabaoth's creation, they've been fighting this war since before time as we know it existed. But here's where it gets complicated, where the lines blur between light and dark in ways that'll make your head spin. Not all angels are on the side you think they're on. The Book of Enoch, removed from most biblical canons, tells us about the Watchers, 200 angels who descended to Mount Hermon and made a pact. They would teach humanity the forbidden knowledge: metalworking, astrology, herbalism, cosmetics, weaponry, and most importantly, magic. Short pause. They also took human wives and created the Nephilim, the giants whose violence and corruption supposedly led to the Great Flood. But was that the whole story? Or were the Watchers punished because they tried to free humanity from Archonic control? The leader of the Watchers was Azazel, and in Jewish tradition he's the scapegoat, literally the goat that carries away sins. He's also equated with Lucifer in later Christian demonology. But what if Lucifer, the light bearer, the one who brought knowledge to humanity in the Garden of Eden, what if he was actually one of the true angels fighting against the Archons? I know. This sounds blasphemous. Your programming is probably screaming right now. But stay with me. The hypostasis of the Archons tells a very different version of the Garden of Eden story. In this version, the serpent isn't evil at all. The serpent is actually Christ, or more specifically, the divine feminine wisdom Sophia, coming to wake up Adam and Eve from their Archonic-induced stupor. The fruit from the tree of knowledge wasn't sin, it was gnosis, direct experiential knowledge of the divine. And Yaldabaoth, that jealous demiurge, he didn't want humans to have it because knowledge equals power and power equals freedom. The war between angels and archons isn't fought with swords and spears in some celestial battlefield. The war is fought in human consciousness, in the realm of ideas, beliefs, and perceptions. Every time a human awakens to their divine nature, every time someone breaks free from fear-based programming and religious dogma, that's a victory for the true angels. Every time someone is enslaved by guilt, shame, materialism, and ignorance, that's a victory for the Archons. The stakes couldn't be higher because your soul, your eternal consciousness, is the prize. And the Archons have had thousands of years to perfect their control systems, religion, government, media, education, all of it designed to keep you spiritually asleep, to keep you reincarnating into their farm system, where they harvest your emotional energy like we harvest wheat. But sure, you're totally free. You've got Netflix and iPhones, so everything's fine, right? The Pistis Sophia, another banned text, describes how Sophia herself had to fight through multiple archonic realms to return to the divine pleroma, the fullness of God beyond material reality. Each realm was guarded by archons who tried to trap her, deceive her, feed off her despair. Sound like anything you've experienced in your own spiritual journey? Those dark nights of the soul, those moments when you feel utterly separated from the divine, when prayers seem to hit a ceiling and bounce back unanswered? Whispers, the Archons are masters of spiritual interference. They mimic divine communication. They create false light experiences. They appear as angels and guides to lead seekers astray. This is why gnosis, direct personal experience of the divine, was so threatening to the institutional church. If people could access God directly, without priests as intermediaries, without ritual and sacrament and donation plates, the whole power structure collapses. And we can't have that, can we? The Gospel of Thomas, found at Nag Hammadi, contains 114 sayings of Jesus that didn't make it into your Bible. Why? Because they're too explicit about the inner kingdom, about self-knowledge as the path to salvation. Saying number 3, if your leaders say to you, "Look, the kingdom is in the sky," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is within you, and it is outside you. No mediator needed, no church required, just you and the divine spark within. With a whisper. The Archons hate that. They need you to believe you're separate, sinful, powerless without external salvation. Linger on this word. Because the moment you realize you're a fragment of the infinite divine source, that you have creative power beyond measure, you become ungovernable. Short pause. Let's talk about the mechanics of this war, because it's not just philosophical. The Gnostic texts get specific about how Archons operate. Titan delivery. They attach to human energy fields, particularly through the lower chakras, feeding on fear, lust, anger, and despair. They create thought forms, entities that we mistake for our own thoughts, whispering suggestions that lead to self-destruction and separation from the divine, with a hint of fear. They can influence dreams, create nightmares, and even manifest as sleep paralysis entities. Ever felt a dark presence in your room at night, a weight on your chest, an overwhelming sense of evil? Pauses. The ancient texts called these encounters Archonic attacks. Modern psychology calls it sleep paralysis, and nothing more. Sarcastically, how convenient. Voice drops lower. The angels, the true messengers of the ineffable source, they operate differently. They can't violate free will, which is a cosmic law even Archons technically shouldn't break, though they constantly find loopholes through deception and manipulation. Speak slowly for emphasis. Angels work through synchronicity, through the subtle guidance of intuition, through moments of grace that can't be explained by material causation. Short pause. They send signs, symbols, numerical patterns, those moments when you're thinking about someone and they suddenly call, when you need an answer and a book falls off a shelf open to exactly the right page. Whispers. The Archons mock these methods, calling them weak. They prefer force, fear, and domination. But the angelic approach respects your sovereignty, your divine right to choose your own path. Pauses. The war intensifies when a soul is on the verge of awakening. The Gnostic text on the origin of the world describes how Archons will intensify their attacks when a human begins to remember their true nature, throwing obstacles, creating crises, manifesting false teachers and predatory spiritual leaders. Read quicker here. This is the spiritual gauntlet that every genuine seeker must pass through. The dark night of the soul isn't a poetic metaphor, it's an archonic siege designed to break your will and force you back into spiritual sleep. Linger on this word. But if you persist, if you hold on to that inner knowing despite the assault, the true angels break through. And when that connection is made, when divine gnosis floods your consciousness, chuckle softly with awe, the Archons lose their grip on you permanently. Short pause. They can still harass you from the outside, but they can no longer control you from within. You become what the Gnostics called a pneumatic, a spiritual human fully awakened to the divine spark within. Now, here's where we need to address the uncomfortable question that's probably burning in your mind. Why did the Church align itself with the Archonic forces? I'm not saying this lightly. The evidence is everywhere once you start looking. Constantine's conversion to Christianity at the Council of Nicaea wasn't about spiritual enlightenment. It was about consolidating power under a unified belief system that could control the masses. The texts that emphasized personal gnosis, that spoke of the Archons and the false creator god, they had to go. Instead, the books that emphasized obedience, authority, sin, and the need for institutional salvation, those were canonized. What a coincidence! The Cathars in medieval France, they revived Gnostic teachings. They preached that the material world was created by an evil demiurge, that the Catholic Church was an archonic institution. Response? The Albigensian Crusade, one of the most brutal genocides in European history. Entire cities burned, men, women, children massacred. The papal legate reportedly said, "Kill them all. God will know his own." 20,000 people died in the city of Béziers alone in a single day. Why such extreme violence? Because the Cathars threatened the archonic power structure. They were teaching people how to escape the reincarnation trap, how to transcend the material prison, how to recognize the counterfeit spiritual authorities. They had to be eliminated completely. The angels watched. They always watch. But divine law prevents them from interfering directly in mass human affairs. That would violate collective free will. However, they work through individuals, through the brave souls who risk everything to preserve forbidden knowledge. The monks who hid the Nag Hammadi texts in a sealed jar and buried them in the Egyptian desert in the 4th century, knowing they'd be killed if discovered, they were working with angelic guidance. The fact that those texts survived 1,600 years and were discovered in 1945, right as humanity entered the atomic age and needed spiritual wisdom more than ever, that wasn't an accident. That was divine timing. The angels play the long game because they exist outside linear time. 1,000 years is nothing to them. They knew these texts would resurface when humanity was ready, when enough souls had awakened to understand and integrate the knowledge. And here we are, in an era where more people than ever are questioning institutional religion, exploring alternative spirituality, experiencing spontaneous awakenings. The Archons are panicking. You can see it in the increasing chaos, the ramping up of fear programming through media, the push toward transhumanism and artificial intelligence, anything to keep humanity trapped in material identification. Because if enough humans wake up simultaneously, if a critical mass achieves gnosis, the entire archonic system collapses. The parasites lose their food source, the prison walls dissolve, and humanity steps into its birthright as divine creators. Let's get specific about what these forbidden texts actually reveal about angelic intervention in the Archonic war. The Apocryphon of John describes how the true Father, the unknowable divine source, sent Christ not as a blood sacrifice to appease an angry God, but as a messenger to awaken humanity from archonic deception. Christ consciousness, in the Gnostic understanding, isn't exclusive to Jesus. It's a state of being that any human can achieve. It's the full activation of the divine spark within, the remembrance of your eternal nature beyond the body and ego. The Archons crucified Jesus not because he claimed to be God, but because he taught others how to become gods, how to recognize the divine within themselves. That's the unforgivable sin in the Archonic system, self-empowerment. They need you dependent, broken, begging for external salvation. A sovereign human being who knows their own divine nature. That's their worst nightmare. The secret book of John goes further, describing how after death, Archons station themselves at various levels of the afterlife, interrogating souls, trying to trap them into another incarnation through guilt, attachment, and false judgments. This is why so many ancient mystery schools taught death preparation, how to navigate the bardos, how to recognize archonic deception in the afterlife and move past it toward true liberation. Now, let's address something that's going to challenge a lot of people watching this.
What about Jesus? What about the angels you've prayed to your whole life? Were they real? Or were they archons in disguise? This is the most personal, most difficult aspect of this knowledge to integrate. The Gnostics didn't reject Jesus, they elevated him. But they distinguished between the historical man Jesus and the eternal Christ consciousness he embodied. They taught that the Christ is not a person, but a state of awakened divine consciousness that exists within all humans as potential. Jesus accessed it fully, became it completely, and tried to teach others to do the same. The kingdom of heaven is within you. I and the Father are one, and you can be too. You will do even greater works than these. These aren't the words of someone who wanted to be worshipped. They're the words of a teacher pointing you toward your own divine nature. But the Archonic forces hijacked his message, turned him into an idol, created a system where you can only reach God through Jesus rather than understanding that you can embody Christ consciousness yourself. See the difference? One empowers you, the other keeps you dependent. As for the angels, some are genuine messengers of the true divine source, but some, the Gnostics warn, are archons wearing angel costumes. How do you tell the difference? Genuine angels never demand worship, never invoke fear to control you, never threaten eternal punishment, and never ask you to surrender your personal sovereignty. They guide, they suggest, they inspire, but they respect your free will absolutely. Archonic entities, on the other hand, even when appearing as angels of light, they manipulate through fear, guilt, and obligation. They present themselves as authority figures you must obey without question. They offer conditional love, rewards if you comply, and punishment if you rebel. Sound like any religious systems you're familiar with? The God who says, "Worship me or burn forever," is not the infinite source of divine love. It's Yaldabaoth, the jealous demiurge, the chief archon who demands your subservience. The true divine source has no ego to stroke, no need for your adoration, no capacity for petty vengeance. It simply is, infinite creative consciousness giving rise to all existence, loving you unconditionally whether you acknowledge it or not. This is why the mystics across all traditions, when they achieve genuine union with the divine, they report the same thing. Overwhelming unconditional love, total acceptance, the dissolution of all fear and separation. That's the real God, the God beyond the God of religion, the ineffable source that the Gnostics called the Father of all, the monad, the One. And the Archons? They've spent thousands of years making sure you never find it, keeping you trapped in fear-based religion that worships the demiurge while thinking it's worshiping the true God. I know this is heavy. I know some of you are feeling your entire worldview cracking apart right now. That's okay. That's part of the awakening process. The red pill isn't easy to swallow, but you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you now know. The question is, how do you do with this knowledge? How do you live in a world controlled by archonic forces while maintaining your connection to the true divine source? The Gnostics had practices, techniques for spiritual protection and sovereignty. They taught how to seal your energy field, how to invoke the names of the true divine powers, how to recognize and dispel archonic thought forms. Modern practitioners combine these ancient techniques with contemporary understanding of psychology, energy work, and consciousness exploration. Meditation, shadow work, breath work, plant medicine ceremonies, when done with proper intention and guidance, kundalini practices, lucid dreaming, astral projection, all of these can be tools for breaking free from archonic control and establishing direct connection with the true divine source and its angels. But, and this is critical, you have to be careful. The spiritual path is littered with traps, false teachings, and predatory gurus who are either consciously or unconsciously serving archonic agendas. Discernment is your most valuable tool. Always question, always verify through your own direct experience. Never surrender your personal sovereignty to anyone or anything, no matter how enlightened they appear.
The war between angels and archons is reaching a critical point in human history. More people are awakening than ever before. The old control systems are visibly crumbling. The archons are desperate, pulling out every trick in their playbook. Engineered crises, mass fear campaigns, transhumanist agendas to merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence, anything to prevent the awakening they know is coming. But they're fighting a losing battle because consciousness itself is evolving. The true angels, operating from beyond time, they've already won. In the eternal now where they exist, humanity's liberation is already accomplished. It's just that we're playing out the final scenes of a cosmic drama where the ending was never in doubt. The Archons know this. That's why they're so frantic, so vicious in their last attempts to maintain control. But every soul that awakens weakens their grip on the collective. Every person who chooses love over fear, truth over comfort, sovereignty over submission, tips the balance further toward liberation. You're not just saving yourself when you do this inner work. You're contributing to the awakening of all humanity. That's how powerful you are. That's why they're so afraid of you remembering who you really are. So let me ask you something, and I really want you to think about this. Maybe pause this video and sit with it for a moment. What if everything you've been taught about good and evil, about angels and demons, about salvation and damnation, what if it was all deliberately inverted to keep you enslaved? What if the beings you've been taught to worship are actually your jailers, and the beings you've been taught to fear are actually trying to free you? I'm not saying that's definitely the case for everyone and everything, because reality is complex, and there are genuine malevolent forces that should be avoided. But I am saying that your discernment needs to be based on direct experience and inner knowing, not on inherited programming from institutions that have lied to you about pretty much everything else. The Gnostic texts were banned for a reason. The mystics were executed for a reason. The truth was hidden for a reason. And now that you know some of that truth, now that you've glimpsed behind the veil, you have a choice to make. Do you go back to sleep, dismiss this as crazy conspiracy theory, return to the comfortable prison of consensus reality? Or do you go deeper, do the inner work, face the shadow, reclaim your sovereignty, and join the war on the side of genuine liberation? Because make no mistake, your choice matters. Your awakening matters. And the angels are watching, waiting, ready to support you the moment you sincerely ask. And the Archons? They're terrified you'll take that step. Everything in your life up until this moment has been preparing you for this decision. What's it going to be? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's continue this conversation. And remember, they tried to erase this knowledge, but truth has a way of resurfacing when it's needed most. Until next time, stay sovereign, stay awake, and never stop questioning everything. This is Occult Chronicles, signing off.